Welcome, everyone. My name is Mark Griffin, the Director of Customer Solutions and the host of the Construx Inspect and Adapt podcasts. I'll be hosting today's webinar, Product Owners and Product Managers. This webinar is part of the Thinking Aloud series by Construx Senior Fellow Earl Beede. Earl's been working in software for well over 30 years, with the last couple of decades with us here at Construx. Earl has recently been working with several of our clients on the similarities and differences between a product owner and a product manager. We said, why not share your insights with the wider Construx audience? And of course, Earl being Earl, he said, sure. And so here we are. A couple of housekeeping items before we begin. Yes, this is being recorded, and we plan to have it up on our YouTube channel soon. And as a reminder, if you're not already, you should subscribe to our YouTube channel as we continue to put up a steady stream of helpful software development insights for you to use to improve your development practices. Also, you can ask questions anytime during the presentation using the little Q&A function in the Teams window toolbar at the top. Earl tells me he has allowed time at the end for a full Q&A, so feel free to enter any questions you like, and we will sort them, and we'll stump the band with Earl at the end of the show. If you have difficulties with anything technically, you can send us your issues using the chat function that's also at the top there. But this is Teams, and we're not always sure exactly why it does what it does, but we'll help you if we can. One other note of future shameless self-promotion before we begin, we have another webinar coming up on December 8th, featuring Jessica Garcia speaking about lessons for supporting and growing women leaders, a topic that is certainly important to all of us. With that, here is Earl's Thinking Aloud about product owners and product managers. Take it away, Earl.
Well, thank you, Mark. That was a wonderful introduction. And I'm happy to be here and happy that you're all here with me to talk about this topic. And as Mark said, this is something that's been coming up a lot with our clients lately, saying, what is the difference? How do these two what should these two do? How should they get along? And we did a lot of thinking about that. And there's no clear, perfect answer yet because, well, product owners are made up roles. So how do we get that all to function? And so I wanted to think aloud with you about all of this. So what will I be thinking about? Well, I think we need to think about some terms, first of all, because when we use the term product, that means something. And so I want to give it a sense of some terms here that might be confusing in your organization, that just getting those nailed down would be a big win. So we're going to think about some core terms that drive the relationship between product owners and product managers. And then I want to look at product management a little bit because there is a slightly larger body, I think actually a much larger body of knowledge around product management than there is product owners. And so product management has been here longer than the role of product owners. So what do they think they are? And then we can sort of see how product owners fit within all of that. And we'll see their biggest conflict comes in the area of requirements. Are they actually doing the same work twice, or are they handing off to each other? Or is one doing it and the other one not doing it? So this is where the conflict typically really resides, and we're going to spend some time focusing on that. And then where do we keep the content of that requirements work? And so we're looking at some packaging decisions about what should be where. And I'll give you a framework to help think about all that so you can actually apply that to your organization straightforward. And then we'll look at some common overlap areas, really specific questions that you may want to think about. And I'll give you a little job aid that you can use to help you decide who's doing what between your product owners and product managers. And then we'll wrap it up with a little brief summary and that time for Q&A. So that's what I'm thinking about. And hopefully you'll think along with me and ask some really good questions. Just again, a reminder of today's tech. You can submit those questions anytime using that little Q&A button that looks like two little speakers with a question mark in it. That should be in your toolbar. I also allowed reactions, so if there's certain things you want to emphasize or give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down, that's perfectly fine. And we are recording this talk. In fact, I'm trying to record it two different ways, so hopefully one of them actually works. All right, so let's get right into it. Starting with some core terms. What terms do I think are really important here when we think about product owners and product managers? Well, I think the first one to think about is that product managers and product owners really should be focused on problems or opportunities. Where can we get the most return on the investment of this team's time? And so I define a problem or opportunity as a need or desire by a consumer to perform a function within acceptable criterion. Now, a couple key words here. We'll define function and acceptable criterion a little bit more in a second. But consumer. Consumer does not mean human. Whoever consumes the thing you're building. So we're going to see this idea of product really sort of wraps around this idea of what have you been asked to build? What is the scope of what you've been asked to build? And then who consumes it? And what problems or opportunities does that consumer have that we want to take advantage of? But the other two words here are also really important. The first one was function. Function to me is an action to take, information to remember, or rule to enforce. So that consumer wants to do something that you're going to provide potentially a better solution to do it. You're going to help solve the problem or help them take advantage of that opportunity. They want to do something, they need to remember something, or there's a rule that they want enforced. But they have to do that within some sort of acceptable criterion, right? And this is where we get acceptance criteria from. They're the attributes of a function. When I do that thing, that action, I remember that stuff, I enforce that rule. When I do that thing, how do I do it in such a way that makes it effective, efficient, has the level of risk that I'm willing to accept at this particular context? It covers everything I need to do, and I don't hate using it, right? Can I do that in an acceptable way? Because for any function that's out there today, there is an alternative. There is another function or another way they can do that same function, but probably in a less acceptable way. So it's not just doing the function, it's doing the function in a way that they find, yes, that's acceptable of these criterion. And for that, then we sort of build a product. The product is a collection of technologies. I define a product as a collection of technologies to apply to a selected consumer problems or opportunities, right? Within the constraints the business has, like its technology and its budgets. So the idea here is that, okay, we understand there's a whole bunch of problems out there, but we have constraints. And I say, well, for all those problems and all the consumers that have problems, I'm primarily solving for this consumer so they can take advantage of this opportunity. This is something I think that Apple's done a really good job with in the early 2000s, is that they said, okay, yeah, there's a music player. We'll make another one. We didn't make a new function at all, but we changed the acceptance criteria because we selected a different consumer and we said, okay, we're going to solve their particular problem to their acceptance criteria within the constraints of our business. So that's a product to me. It's something we're building, we're collecting technologies and applying it to solve that particular problem. And that particular problem means we're giving them capabilities that they didn't have before. Now, these capabilities are saying we're solving your problem in a better way than you can currently solve it with all your alternatives. So they're trying to execute something. They're trying to do a workflow or transaction with our product. So we give them these capabilities within their products, and we support those capabilities with features. Now, this is really, I think, important when we talk about product owners and product managers, is that too many people think, oh, their job is to organize features. And features are actually at the bottom of the stack right here. Right, as we've defined all these terms, features are just the technology we apply to enable one or more capabilities. That is, a particular feature can support multiple different capabilities or workflows, and a workflow may need multiple features. But the value comes in providing the capability to a consumer to solve their problem. And this is how we always have consistently defined value. Value is actually solving problems, not delivering features. So when we talk about product owners and product managers, that might be one of the first areas that we might be able to draw a thin line through. Product management should be deeply concerned with problems and opportunities and crafting a product that the business can build that solves those problems within the constraints of the business, its budget and its technologies. Product owners may be saying, okay, we're supposed to queue up those features that enable capabilities that the product manager envisioned. Who knows? Let's take a deeper look at those. But this is one area that you can actually start to improve with in your organizations, is to say, what do we mean when we say product? What is our product? I've recently been with 3 or 4 clients, and I've asked them, okay, tell me what your product is. And they're like, and they start debating among themselves. I was with one group just recently where their CEO was there going, I'm shocked. These are my leaders of the organization, and they can't define the product. I was with a huge manufacturer a couple weeks ago, and they're like, well, is the product at this level or at this level, right? Where we can put that product boundary. So that's just a big win in itself. If you can come up with a clear idea of what product actually means for your organization. So these are the terms I'm going to be using as we talk about product owners and product managers. But I wanted to look at product management first because, again, it has a lot more depth in its body of knowledge. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but I want to just sort of sense, what does it mean to be a product manager? And this is where I asked, and they said I could use it. I borrowed, I guess is a better term, because they said I could use it, this diagram from the Pragmatic Institute. I took training from them years ago because I want to know, what were they telling their product managers that was feeding the people on my projects to do requirements? And this is their idea of what a product manager always does. And you start out here with strategic side. You sort of start on this side and start thinking, what are the problems? There's our friends, the market problems again, right? What are the problems or opportunities that are out there that we need to do? And do we have technologies or some way to say we can do that better than all the other alternatives out there? What gives us an advantage here doing this? Okay. It jumped around. My pen thing is not working like it's supposed to. That's an update from Microsoft. I can't clear it off. Oh, well. So what does that have to do? And so we look at all this. You see all these things on here that they think they're doing, from the strategic aspect, what's the market, where's our focus, how are we going to do this, to how we're going to bring a business plan around this in terms of profit and loss. And where we start seeing the overlap with product owners, I think is only in this section down here, right? This is where product owners and product managers tend to seem to have the most conflict. I don't hear product owners saying, oh, we should go out and do win-loss analysis. Or I don't hear product owners saying, our distribution strategy is mine, right? Where I hear them saying that they think they have some ownership, given the product owner title, is down here. It's like, what are the requirements? What are the use scenarios? Who's going to talk to the stakeholders about the progress and how the state of the product is at this particular point in time? Who has that job? I think this is where product owners think that they have a lot of role. But it's traditionally been part of product management. As you can see on this chart, that's been around in some form since the 90s, right? Well before the Scrum gurus invented the product owner. And it goes on to all the details and grunt work after the product's left, with things like operations and events to roll it out and all that kind of stuff, and who are your sales channels, right? All that stuff is something that product management has to do. So my first take here when I'm looking at product owners and product management is saying, it looks like the product owner role has carved out some of what we've traditionally called product management. And I think that's a reasonable way to start thinking about this. And so we want to look at that carve out and say, okay, how can we get these two along to do what they're doing? So let's take a little bit depth about what these two roles sort of differ on. What do product managers tend to do, and what product owners tend to do? Well, if you look at what product managers tend to do, you tend to see things like they have to understand that market, right? They need to understand the problems, opportunity, and who are all the consumers, including, and I'll suggest this later, they're non-consumers, people who aren't currently consuming their product, but could be or should be. They should be able to looking at and saying, is there an opportunity here, given our technology and the money we want to spend, can we get a positive ROI? And they have to evaluate that and make that call. They also have to understand where the existing solutions, there's always an existing solution of some kind, where that existing solution is falling short for the consumers. It's not meeting the acceptance criteria that they have. They may not explicitly state it, but it's in there and they're upset or they're frustrated with it, how it's working right now. They need to deeply understand that because they're betting the company's time and money to invest in something that's going to hopefully get a positive ROI. And then they say, okay, among all the needs that we saw out there, because there's tons and tons of needs, which one do we actually going to do something about? Because there could be needs that they don't want to address. I was joking with a medical device company a while back, and on their testing machine, there's an oven because it has to heat the fluid sample several times for the DNA to replicate and all this kind of stuff. And I said, wow, you got an oven. And you have all these hungry techs that are college students who are probably consistently hungry. Perhaps we should be able to heat up a burrito in that oven too, right? That's certainly their consumer. That's a need that they have. They're hungry. They want to heat up a burrito. You've got an oven. Let's make it happen. And they're like, yeah, that's a problem. Yeah, that's a need. But no, we're not going to address that. That's not something we're going to choose to address. And that's a product manager's job to say, no, we're not going to address that problem. That's not something we're going to go after right now. So product managers have to decide what problems or opportunities get addressed, when they get addressed, and how we're going to deliver that out to the marketplace. It also says, okay, we see these needs, and now I have to understand the constraints. So they have to work with technology leadership and the business community to say, what can we possibly build? Right? They don't know the technology necessarily. They might be familiar with it, but they need to work with technology leadership saying, okay, where can we move those criterion with our technology? Because if we can't move them sufficiently, we may not want to invest because we won't get our money back. Right? So it's a conversation they have to have with leadership, but they still get to define, say, okay, here's the product. Hearing what I hear from technology, hearing and knowing what I know about the business constraints, here's a product that we could build that will have a positive ROI worthy of investing our time on. And then they have to then show how all that fits with the bigger picture of all the other products that the company is working on and where it stands. How good is that ROI? How does it further the overall strategy of the business? That's product manager's job. And if you look at their day-to-day activities, they're primarily working with consumers, the people that are trying to use the product to get some sort of workflow done that your product helps support, right? And they have to interact with the business to understand the constraints and technology leadership. Now, how is this different from product owners? Product owners need to be knowledgeable about the product and the technology. They don't have to be deeply immersed like product managers in the market, and they don't have to be deeply immersed in the technology like the technology leaders, but they have to be knowledgeable about these things. They have to have some level of understanding, but they don't have to be experts in either one of these things. They do need to work closely with the product manager because their job is to implement the roadmap in a sense, right? To say, okay, the product manager said, here's where we want to go, here's where we want to invest. Product owners seem to be the ones that take that investment and make sure it's happening on the team. Their job is to feed the development team to fulfill that roadmap. However, product management, they realize it's only one stakeholder. Several companies I work with, there's always a customer support function that has their own goals for the year. And their own goals usually are something about reducing costs or faster service times or something like that. And to do that, they need certain features in the product, which the product manager doesn't really care about. In fact, if the product manager had their way, they would strip them out because customer service, that's just a cost function. We can live with it. But customer service has their goal, and they want certain things in the product as well. Product owners have to work with multiple stakeholders beyond product management, while still trying to implement that roadmap and balance out these other needs. In a way, you can start saying product owners were as an attempt by the development organization itself to say, I don't have to listen to 18 stakeholders. Yes, I know product management is important. Yes, I know customer service is important. Yes, I know regulatory, or yes, I know that maintenance is important. But I don't have to talk to 17 stakeholders. I want to talk to one stakeholder. And so the product owner takes on that intermediary role. It listens to those people and then does the balancing act, how much of each of those should be addressed in any given increment or release of the product. And to do that, to do all this work, to really break it down, understand it, they have to be experts. Here's where their expertise really shines. How do they do business analysis to drive down, separate out, and formulate really great requirements, really great understanding of the product that they can use to move it forward? This is where I see product managers often fall down in this area. It's because they don't have this expertise. They don't know how to do this kind of work very well. They're not experts in use case modeling and user stories or state diagrams or entity relationship diagrams. They don't know how to do that. Product owners should have that skill. They have to be great at understanding and decomposing and analyzing the business and pulling it apart to usable chunks that they can feed the team. And then from those chunks, they're the backlog steward, right? This is sort of the essence of what it means to be a product owner. In fact, I think if they would have renamed it as backlog steward, a lot of things would have been cleaned up right off the bat. Product owners, in my opinion, don't really own much of anything, but they are clear backlog stewards. They're helping arrange the backlog, make sure it goes in the right order, that things are prepared and ready to go for the development team when they need to do it, right? So backlog steward might be a way to start thinking about this role and clarify a lot of what's going on in your organizations. And from that work and watching the team work, I think it's the product owner who gets to forecast where the product is based upon the current consumption patterns. Like I can see your velocity, I can see how fast you're doing this work. And so given 3 more sprints or 2 more increments or a milestone, we should be about here. I think product owner has that visibility and that ability to make that call. And when we're talking product owners, we're obviously talking agile because that's where the product owner role comes from. And their worldview is working daily with the agile team, not working with the consumers outside, but daily interacting with the agile team. So if you had to sum up these 2 roles a little bit, I think you sum up the product manager as primarily an outward-facing role. That is, it's looking outside the organization and say, okay, what are the needs, the problems, the opportunities? Where product owners are mostly inward-facing. They're looking at the product managers, but other stakeholders and say, okay, how do we combine all these things and give the right set of work to the development team so they produce a new product increment that's valuable to the organization? And where they conflict the most is typically around requirements. And so one way to think about, you need to think about requirements and start saying, okay, now you said, Earl, their job is to understand the problem, and requirements typically are about what problems or opportunities are out there. But we also said that the product owner has this deep understanding of how to do requirements analysis and business analysis, which creates requirements. So what's going on here? Who does what? And to set that up, I want you to start thinking about requirements, for at least for the rest of this discussion, as decisions that we impose on implementation. And typically, most organizations, they say, well, we have something called a marketing requirements. And if you look at it, it's just decisions marketing people made about what the product should do. And if you have a business requirements, it's decisions of what business people have made of what the product would do. Now, if you look at the content of the decisions, it's all over the place. But it's decisions that we impose in the implementation. And this is really handy because I also think that design is a decision that we impose on the implementation. We can say, oh, there's more decisions that if you build it, you got to do it this way. Design clearly falls in that category as well. So decisions that we impose the implementation. Now this is really handy because you can start asking all sorts of good questions about the decisions. And one of the questions you should ask is, what is the content of the decision? So I think once you define your product boundary, you can start seeing that there's 2 main bits of content you have to decide. What's that problem or opportunity that we're trying to solve for, and how we're going to solve that problem? These are the 2 main decision camps. And we can make decisions about these at multiple levels. Certainly at one level is the whole product level, something that impacts the entire product. So if I make a decision that impacts the entire product, like we're going to use a certain language, that's a whole level decision. If I'm only making a decision that affects one small part, that's not a whole. So whole levels in. How much of the product does the decision impact? Whole thing, that's the top of my stack. And then you work your way down, right? There could be things that only affect a portion of the product, a big chunk maybe, a subsystem, a component. There's some sort of chunk that if the decision impacts. And then there's decisions that impact just tiny bits of it. One algorithm, one class, one preference, something like that. So you can start saying, hey, I got decisions that go from very high-level decision to low-level decisions. And now this is really key. Because when I think about requirements, I think high-level requirements are just as measurable and testable and definable as low-level requirements. It's just the scope of the decision. And so we start applying the same process, same ideas about how to do this work over and over again. So what kind of decisions are we thinking about in the problem side? Well, on the problem side, I think we're thinking about decisions like what's the overall mission of the organization that we're trying to solve for? What jobs are they trying to do? What are their goals? Their workflows, and within a workflow, the different ways to accomplish that workflow, the different courses or paths through that workflow, or threads, if you like that term. And that path or thread has various steps along the way. Those are decisions. If you understand what they're trying to achieve, what they're trying to do, where they're trying to go with their workflow or their mission, that's the problem or opportunity we're trying to solve. And we capture that in documents like these, right? These are artifacts that we might capture them in things like product visions or roadmaps or use cases, right? These are the kinds of things that we use to capture this problem space, right? This area that says, hey, tell me about the problem or opportunity, all the way down to little tiny things like, oh, they have a preference for a certain color on a certain screen. Perfectly fine. What kind of decisions we're trying to make on the solve side? Well, on the solve side, we're trying to make things like, what technologies are we going to use? What's our technology bet, right? We make big bets on technology and we have to understand what they are. And how are we going to organize all these parts into a system of systems or application or a system altogether? And then we can break that down in some sort of decomposition into components and features and units and all the way down. And what kind of artifacts we tend to capture those in? Everything from architectures and standards, those are our big bets, to high-level designs, low-level designs, and features, right? All sorts of features and solutions and units, all kinds of things that we can capture those decisions in. Now, how does this affect our product owners and product managers? Well, if you think about the product manager, I think the product manager sort of owns this entire side. And what do I mean by own? I mean they're ultimately responsible for the decisions on this side. That is, anything about the problem, they are the ones in the hot seat to say, I am the final arbitrator of any kind of conflict or misunderstanding here. It's my tush in the hot seat, if you will. Now, I don't do all this work, but I'm the one ultimately responsible. I own the problem. But I only tend to do this kind of work, if you will. Product managers, in my experience, tend to only focus at the top, these big level decisions, the overall vision, roadmaps, maybe some customer journeys, something like that. These are the things they tend to build and start saying, okay, this is what I will create to capture the decisions that I own. But they're only capturing the top level ones down here. And this is where I think the product owner really comes in. I think if we start looking at these lower ones, this is where the product owner steps up. Not only because they're available and they have that interest and they're inward facing, but because they have the skills to do it, right? Product managers typically, in my experience, do not have the right set of skills to do this detailed analysis work, nor do they have often the time or even the desire to do it. This top stack takes a lot of effort by itself. So having the product owners take over creating the artifacts that really drive the details and the actual work, I think is a win-win here. We used to do it before with roles called business analysts. Product managers were supported by bunches of business analysts who did the same work. I think the product owner in our Agile team can step up and take that work here. And just so I want to finish out real quick, if you talk about ownership here, I think technology leaders own the top of the stack. If you're a small team, then you are the leaders and you own it, right? If you scale up larger and larger, usually you're going to see other people step up and own a bit more of that stack, right? And then by the time we were talking Agile, it's always going to be the case that developers should own the bottom of the stack. They're responsible for the decisions, the ultimate authority of the decisions at the bottom that are in line with the top, right? They can't do something that violates the architectures or violates the standards. Even if they're the ones that came up with them, they'd have to change the architecture and standards to match. So that's where we start thinking requirements. If we go back and just be clear about this, I think if we're talking about requirements, we're going to see the product managers doing most of the work up here. They should be the ones writing and capturing these things. And then product owners doing most of the work down here in the order, in the prioritization as set up typically by product managers. So how do we capture that in a format that people can actually enjoy, that they can understand? What's a great way to package all those little artifacts, those decisions, use cases, and roadmaps and stuff like that? Well, I've come up with a series of packaging ideas that works for me, but you could use this as a springboard for your own kind of packaging decisions. I think there is something to be said about having some sort of market or customer requirements document. That is a place where we collected all the decisions about what problems are out in the real world. Now, I like this because it does a couple things for me. One, I can have garbage in here because I don't make this binding. I make this advisory. This is something that says, what are we hearing out there? Not what are we going to build? What are we committing to? No, this is just what are we hearing out here? So customer A could say, I want X, and customer B says, I want anti-X, and that's just fine. Right? I'm not here to resolve that yet. I'm here to say, what are we hearing out there? What are the problems? What are the opportunities out there? What are people doing? How are they using our product or our competitors' products or alternate workflows altogether that are less usable or less friendly? What's going on out there? I want a collection of this. And if I had it my way, I'd have one per customer, right? If this is a customer class, they would get their own customer requirements, and a different customer class would get their other own customer requirements. Though in the most of regulatory organizations I've been working with lately, they want one document that captures everyone. Fair enough, right? But I think this is independent about what you're going to build. This is just, if you use that phrase that's used so often, the voice of the customer. What is it that they actually care about, and how do they measure success of what they're doing? Their problem, their functions, and their acceptance criteria. That's what's in this marketing requirement. From their perspective, what functions do we need to execute within a workflow, and what do we deem acceptable execution of those functions? How are we going to judge them? From that marketing requirements document, then I start saying, okay, let's then say, what can we possibly build? And that's what I call product requirements. Product requirements, and this is both being done now by the product managers. Product managers are taking the lead on both of these documents. What the product requirement says, it says, I'm going to have that conversation with technology. I'm going to have that conversation with the business. And we're going to start saying, what can we build based upon hearing this voice of the customer, right? As a product manager, I want to go the other way. As a product manager, I want to hear this voice of the customer, undiluted. They want to be able to build widgets at 10,000 per minute. Okay, so I talked to our technologists. They want to do 10,000 per minute. And the technologist says, well, given our technology, we can do 700 per minute. All right, that's as best we can do with the current technology. That's still beating their current 200 per minute. They want to do 10,000. They're only doing 200. Our new technology can help them do 700. That's a big win. That's moving them closer to where they want to say is acceptable. So let's define a product that does 700 widgets, right? So the customer requirement said 10,000 was our desired, but the product requirement says, no, 700 is the best we can do, because that's the limits of our technology and what we're willing to spend and wait. However, that's still better than their current situation, which is 200. So product requirement says, let's take those customer requirements and then modify them slightly, the acceptance criterion primarily, to say, okay, what can we agree to build that addresses those problems, opportunities, and which ones do we want to pick? This is still the product manager's world. They're working with technology leadership. They're working with the business constraints, the budgeting, that kind of thing, to define a product. Meanwhile, there should be some technology creating the architectures, right? Saying, okay, we're in this product space. This is our major architecture. We've heard about the problems. This is an architecture, set of standards, set of technologies that we think we can apply to solve these problems. And this is the technology people own this, right? Product management doesn't own this, the technology people. Product management has to talk to the technology people to get that done. But enough said there. So what is the product owner doing? Well, the product owner is taking that product requirements and starting to decompose it down. Remember, the product requirements is still mostly problem opportunity focused. What we've done is adjust the acceptance criterion to something that we can build in a reasonable amount of time at a reasonable cost that still does something to move them better than they currently have with all the other solutions. So the product owner is going to take that product requirement and start decomposing it based upon some criterion. First of all, what are the most important workflows to support? Notice I sort of had in the product requirements a set of these workflows, right? What are the workflows going to happen? We're going to have to prioritize those workflows. Which ones do we want to address first? Which ones we address second? And then the product owner is going to come and start saying, let me start populating my backlog with the first workflows and start decomposing those down to courses and paths. So what I mean the difference between a workflow and a course. So quick example, a workflow might be withdraw money from my bank account. Okay, that seems pretty simple. It has a clear beginning. I know when I start to withdraw money, a clear end. I know when it's done. And the reason I want to interact with a bank system in the first place is to get money. So withdraw money from a bank account. Well, there's like 18 different ways I could do that. One way would be to walk up to a cash machine and take it out checking. Another way is to walk up to a cash machine and take it out of savings. And I could have different amounts. Or I can write a check, or I can use an app. It goes on and on. There's multiple ways I can get money out of my account interacting with a banking system. So each of those is a different course or path or different way to achieve that workflow of take money out of the banking account. And so I might want to build 1, 2, 3 of those workflows, but I may not want to build them all. It's the product owner's job to start queuing that up, start having these conversations saying, okay, we built 3 courses to this workflow. Should we switch workflows and work on a couple of courses on the other workflow or continue on this workflow? Right? This is where the product owner starts forcing the product manager to make core decisions about where we should be headed. And I often say these core decisions are often the response of a thing I call backfilling, where the product owner makes the decision and says, here's where we're going. Let me know if you have a problem with this. So the decision actually gets made and we move forward, right? And then we start executing it. So the product owner sort of takes over doing the work on this part of the stack. When we store those in the product backlog, this is where the product backlog comes into being. I try not to put the product requirements in the product backlog. They tend to be a lot more stable and less dynamic. My backlog should be flowing, constantly updating, changing. And I don't want my product requirements doing that quite as much. And of course, over here on the solution side, somewhere, and no one's told me a great place for this yet, where we physically store them, are going to be all the specs, the design specs, feature specs, all the things we're going to design and build, how we're going to solve this solution. So let's look at some detail areas and give you a job aid that you can use to help separate your product owners from product managers a little bit, or make clear who's doing what. And this is something, again, I stole from Pragmatic Institute, borrowed with their permission, then adapted it quite a bit. But the idea is there's different kinds of work that we often see here. And it's worth to say, who has the skill to actually make the decision? Whose butt's in the seat? Who's getting paid the big bucks to be the final arbitrator on this particular decision? Who has the skill or the responsibility to decide? And that's different than the skill to actually execute. Because I may have the need to make the decision, it's my job to decide, but I don't have the skill to do all the detailed research and preliminary activities to set up that decision. I need a team of analysts or specialists to do that work, and then I can make a decision based upon what they share with me. That's a very common model we see in all sorts of organizations. So it's separating those two out. Who's responsible for doing the final decision, even though they may just defer to whatever decision the specialist made who did the work of preparing the decision, right? They just always seem to accept the recommendation, that works for me. So splitting those two up can help you also then start seeing who's product owner, who's product manager, or who's neither. So you think about planning and initial designing, right? So you think about, capture and communicate the product vision. I'm certainly going to say that's going to be the product owner, certainly in the hot seat. And I think it's going to be, product manager is the hot seat for the product vision. And I think they should have the skill to execute that. Though I haven't found many that do yet. I think they should, or certainly should align someone who can help them do that. So maybe the product owner might be the one that you say is going to help the product manager set the product vision. Define overall themes, goals of release. Again, I think the product manager has to be the one to decide, because I think they own that entire side. But again, the product owner may be the one you can say is going to do the work to set up that decision and then make a preliminary decision on behalf of the team. So you just go through this list. They're saying who's going to be doing this work? Who's going to be the finally making the decision? But prioritizing defects, I might say that I'm going to let the product owner decide that one. Right? We're just going to let the product owner decide which defects get worked, because they're down in the trenches. They're understanding what the needs are for the workflows. They know what defect that workflow is impacting. So they can decide, is that more important to work on than the next workflow, right? So they can set that up. And there's some things out here. Estimate the expected rate of output for the development team. I don't think the product manager has any clue here, so I think the product owner can actually estimate that. They can't dictate it, but they can say, okay, I can see what they've been doing, and I have both the skills to execute and the ability to inform the rest of the world to do that. Define the interim steps for development to build and test the product. This might be one I'm saying, do I want my product owner doing that, or I want the team doing that? Right? Maybe I want to look at that one a little differently. So you can use this list. I also have another one for development and testing. Status meetings here at the first one, call them regular status meetings, in the sense of the overall big picture, not the individual teamwork, but the big picture work. I think that makes sense. Assign tasks to individual developers and testers. This is one hopefully where you say neither, right? If we're doing Agile at all, the tasks should be something the team decides among itself, not the PO, not the product manager. Hopefully you say neither on this one. But again, clarity is something to help you decide how you want to do it. And go down the list here. Develop and define and develop the user interface. Do I want either of them really doing that, right? This is where I had a really good time at a company back in the early 2000s. They were spiraling downhill. And one of the reasons they were spiraling downhill is that they had their product management and their marketing team designing user interfaces, and they couldn't design worth squat. They were crappy. They had one great designer who happened to be the VP, and since the VP was a great user interface designer, everyone who worked under them thought, oh, we should do it too. And no, they shouldn't. And one of my advices was to get that VP out of that area and into a special project somewhere and tell them to stop doing it. Well, they did that, and turned out the VP had another hit product, and the rest of the team continued to suffer a little bit because they couldn't give it up, right? So you can go down this list and start saying, how do we want this to actually work? And determining the product is released to the market. Again, that's probably product management should be the one in the hot seat, but again, the skill to execute this one is going to be in the product owner. So separating out those two roles and start saying, clear, where do I want these to actually do the work versus who is the hot seat for the decision? And do I want to give the person doing the work sort of the first cut and saying, unless I tell you differently, can proceed on. So this is a good tool to help you look at those particular instances. And of course, by delivering the marketing plan, capture parties, buyer personas, etc., you can start saying this is really work that still needs to be done that I should have my product managers really stepping up to for the most part. So these are hopefully a little bit clearer as well. All right. So summarizing here a little bit about what I've sort of suggested between the product owners and product managers, I think you can sort of sum it up in a nutshell. I think that product owner is a specialist product management, right? I'm a tool for product management to actually organize and get the work done, as opposed to being a separate entity altogether. If I had my way, the product owner would work for product management as an analyst executioner. That is, they execute the visions and the things set up by product management. They're an extension of product management to the team who works daily with the team, as opposed to a separate organization or separate silo that has their own agenda. I would prefer this to be part of the overall product management function. I think it makes most sense there. And they can do this specialist work that requires tools and techniques and things that is not available to your typical product manager who doesn't have any desire often even to learn those skills. That's Earl's take on the role between product owner and product manager. And with that, I'm happy to answer some questions if any came up.
Excellent job, Earl. I appreciate it. Very well done. We do have several that have come in, and they're very interesting. I think you'll enjoy these. It might make your tie spin, but we'll see.
Bow tie Tuesday. I didn't mention that, did I? Bow tie
That's
Tuesday.
Right. I should have. Your sartorial display is well in front. So this gentleman asked the question. In my experience, product managers have to work more cross-functionally across engineering teams or units, whereas product owners might be more aligned to one or at least fewer engineering teams. Very curious to hear your thoughts on that model.
So my initial reaction is not a big fan. What tends to happen here is when Scrum was invented, they started thinking, the basic rule of thumb is one product owner, one team. And so we kept the one product owner, one team model pretty intact, but we forgot the one product. And so it comes back to when I started at the beginning of this talk, what do you define as a product? Let me sort of draw it up here a little bit, right? So if I say, this is my product, I have my product space, right? I should have for this one PM, one product manager, and it should have one PO. Now, it might have one to many dev teams underneath it because it's that big of a project. But that would be my preferred way. Now, if you have some scaling issues, you can have some, some people call assistant product owners that help this person out. But I still want a chief product owner who's saying, hey, we have to build an instance of value of this thing. That's our product increment. Too often what they do is they have little parts in here. I'll draw as red boxes. And then so we'll give each of these red boxes their own PO. And hopefully someday they'll all come together to build this bigger thing that we actually care about. So I'm not a big fan. Now, product management should span across multiple engineering teams and potentially some assisting teams like training, documentation, regulatory. Product management should have a big say in all that because they're trying to build a product that gets out the door. Whereas PO is going to be only focused primarily on feeding the dev teams, right? They're doing that detail analysis work to feed the dev team. So again, PO being a specialist here, I think makes a lot of sense. At least that's my take on it. What do you think, Mark? Did I get close to the answer you were hoping for?
I like that. I think that works. And so that kind of leads to this one, and there's actually there's a couple of folks who have asked this question. Would you recommend to have PM and PO responsibilities combined in one role or person when this person has the capabilities required? In other words, is it comfortable to operate from product vision level to product stories level?
I think that would be ideal, right? If you could have one person that does it all, that way they don't get schizophrenic and have to check with other people, unless, they're crazy. That'd be ideal. If you start to scale, and in fact, in your smaller startups, that's probably the case, that one person is doing all of it, because you don't need a lot of detailed analysis work because you're having constant conversations because you're small and you're tightly knit. Once you just start to scale up, though, I see this to break down pretty quickly because there just isn't enough time to do both jobs. I think at any kind of reasonable scale. What's my scale here? You got over 50, 60 developers. I'm not seeing how that's going to happen very well. Because that means you have a big enough product and a big enough client base that you have to spend a lot of time understanding the external factors and working across multiple different disciplines to help something out the door. So while I would prefer this to be one person, if I possibly could pull it off, if they have the skill set, that's the preferred state. I'm not seeing that as, for anything other than small startups, something that I see actually happening or probably should happen because of the needs of the jobs.
Good answer, thanks. So that there's another question about, there's this role called the business analyst that we've had for
Decades.
Generations of software, right?
Yeah.
Where does that role sit? What does that add value in this space anymore?
I think the discipline, so let's split that into two things. Let's talk about the discipline of business analysis and the role of business analyst. I think that the discipline about business analysis, the discipline is certainly space. In fact, I almost always charge my product owners, you should be seeing yourself as business analysts. That is, that you should have those disciplines under your belt. Whether you want to use that title or not, I could care less. But you should have that skill set under your belt. You need to know this is the core of your job: breaking down big things in small chunks, ordering work, understanding workflows, making sure it gets done, not losing bits along the way. Critical parts of what it needs to be to that job. So I think a big chunk of what they should have, big chunk of what a product owner should be doing is kind of business analysis work. I always like to joke that 80% of their job, in my opinion, is BA work. 20% of the job is that product management, bet the company, am I working on the right kind of thing work, right? So do we still need other business analysts? I think that could be a possibility. I was working with a medical device company last year, and they had a product owner, but they had a team of business analysts supporting that product owner because it was just that big of a project. It was 50 million euros. It was going to take 4 years, right? There wasn't any way that one individual could even do the decomposition work. So they had a team of business analysts. You can call them associate product owners if you want, or assisting product owners, but they just call them business analysts. And they were assisting the product owner doing that work of arranging the work, understanding the workflows, decomposing the functions, inheriting the acceptance criteria, all that kind of work. Does that get it close Excellent. To the question?
That's very good. Okay. That's very good. We got a flurry of them coming in, so I'll keep going here. How do we manage older generations of products while balancing future initiatives? Changes to older generations, bridge olds versus new while migrating to new, et cetera. What do you think about that?
Yeah, so I have a lot of thoughts, and as the thing says here, answers free, correct answers. Well, that'd be interesting. So when you're dealing with existing technologies, this is where I think we've run into this idea of people always want to say, well, we need to dump this one and build the next gen. And I can't tell you how many times that Construx as a company has been called in on the next gen product that was scheduled to take 1 to 2 years, and then they're in their third or fourth year. Because next gen products never seem to get out the door. Because we haven't made any tough choices. We haven't made any hard decisions. And so when you're doing that, evolving an existing product, you have to make some really hard decisions about who is your primary consumer. What are the primary workflows that you need to support and make better? And this is something, again, I pick on Apple because they do it over and over again. They just released the M1 chip, right? And when the M1 chip, when the first computers came out, only ran a small fraction of the software that their old Intel chips does. In fact, it will never run some of the software that the old Intel chip does. But they made the choice saying, hey, for our core customers, for these core workflows that we know we want to support, this new product does it way better. And so you stay on your old product if that's helpful to you. Stay on the Intel chip. We'll still sell it for a little bit. But if you want to take advantage, move over. And their customers have mostly moved on over because that's so much better for many of the workflows that they do. And this is where the hard decisions come in. You have to say no to some things and then build it back up again. You find those core workflows, you find those core value propositions, meet those, and then build yourself back up over time to the state where you match sort of all the functions of the previous one, not taking the previous one off the market. If you try for the all or nothing switchover, those tend to fail miserably.
Good thoughts. Another question, do you have any tool recommendations that help the product manager, developer maintain their work products and artifacts?
That's a great question. There are classes of tools out there that you already may be familiar with called Application Lifecycle Management, ALM tools. I just was one last week introduced to me for the first time called Paranoia. No, I don't even remember the name anymore. There's a whole bunch out there. Then you got the Jiras and the Azure DevOps kind of tools. And mostly all these things are relational databases with a hierarchical structure in them, right? Where you have a familiar folder interface and you break it down. I find that for most of the time, those make reasonably good repositories. Repository is a place where I want to store things that don't change that often, and I want to be my source of truth. However, for a working space, I want a more dynamic, more messy place that I can change quickly and easily. I find those ALM tools, those Jiras and such in the world too difficult to try to interact with on a daily basis. You spend all your time navigating and clicking things and not actually getting things done. So I want to use a more dynamic space. And here's where I've been pretty pleased with the virtual whiteboard spaces, the murals, the Miros, the other ones out there. Even Zoom's whiteboard's taking a big step forward, as is Microsoft Teams whiteboard, though I wouldn't trust Microsoft Teams whiteboard quite yet myself. Right? But the things like Miro, where I can get 20, I've had 150 people working together on something on that space, changing things, using the sticky notes. And there's even ways now, and I know with Miro, for example, and I think Miro and others do it too, where you can connect that back into those repositories like Jira to actually get the things done. So use a dynamic workspace like a collaborative workboard, since we're all distributed to some degree right now anyhow. So those murals or Miros kind of things out the world, or the Zoom whiteboards. And then once things stabilize, go stick them into your ALM tools.
Makes sense. A couple more here. What do we do if we don't have a product owner but just have a product manager? And what about the reverse?
Yeah. Do your best. So if you have no product owner, which is the more common one, because it's like, well, we really don't have a product owner. If you're small, we can get away with that, because really what we need to be able to do is queue up work, have work coming into the team that keeps the team busy, that moves them in the right direction. If you're really small, you can probably pull this off, right? Or if you have a senior team, you can probably pull this off, because the team knows where it needs to go. It's just waiting for the next bit of work to make it happen, right? So senior team, close-knit team, yeah, I could probably pull off having one of those roles missing, because we're small enough to pull it off and we know the market well enough. If I start getting bigger, if I start getting junior people in here, new hires, too much distribution, I need to really get someone to step into those roles. Now, I will probably take an engineering manager and throw them in the PO role if no one else is stepping up for that, because engineering managers traditionally have been pretty good at the sense of where does this product need to go. They're in those conversations with other people. They're talking. They have the time to go off and have those conversations and then help the team direct them. I got to coach them back on the task assignment part a little bit, because that's whether that job aid I gave you kind of says, well, I don't want engineering managers doing that either, right? I want the team doing the task assignment. So I have to watch that a little bit. But yeah, I'll probably throw an engineering manager as a substitute for a PO. If I don't have any product management whatsoever, this is where there's probably some VP that's in charge of the product. They're acting as a product manager. So I would then throw that VP in the role, but I would start doing more what I call backfilling again, where I was assuming the role as doing most of the work, making most of the decisions as the product owner, and then telling them, constantly feeding them, here's where we're going, here's where we're going, here's where we're going. If this is not right, now is a great time to stop us, because we're executing. Right? Because too many projects sit in limbo waiting for someone somewhere to make a decision.
Right. Now, here's a good one for you. This is a bigger picture one. Scaling from a startup to a large product. Imagine, say, 50 to 60 devs, 10,000 customers. What would be your suggested product manager, product owner, business analyst ratio for ideal collaboration and productivity? In other words, get an effective product out the door.
So number of customers, unless I would have to actually know better what the number of customer classes were. I mean, if I have 10,000 people doing the exact same thing, I don't care if it's 10,000 or 10 million, right? It's one customer as far as the product is concerned. It just has to scale technically to do that. If it's 10,000 unique different uses, well, that's a different story, right? That's really scary. So I'm assuming the 10,000, let's say we have half a dozen customer classes in that 10,000. I only need one product manager for that size, right? It's only when I've started looking at maybe 25 or more customer classes, right? If I'm constantly customizing my product and it's unique for every instance, practically, I'm working with people that do labs, right? And so every lab installation is a unique lab. Well, okay, I'm going to have a more complex product management structure for that kind of thing. Once I get a product, then we're going to have to talk about number of teams. If I have one team, one product owner, regardless of the number of customers, number of customer classes, I can get away with one product owner, and I don't need an analyst, probably in that situation. If I start looking at 2 or 3 teams, I probably want a product owner and an analyst or 2 to assist them.
Makes sense. So here's a classic. What if the product owner and product manager disagree? Who wins? Do they go in the mud pit and figure it out, or how does that work?
Yeah. This is where I have to take my product owner to the woodshed. I say, this is you're really just a backlog steward. You don't own squat. You don't get to say where the product going over time, unless you're the CEO's son-in-law or daughter-in-law. You just don't get that. This is what the product manager is supposed to be paid for. If you disagree strongly with where they're going, if you think this is nuts, there's a chain of command, right? You can talk to their boss, you can make a presentation, but in the long run, the product manager, I think, owns that entire problem space. They win. Makes
sense. All right, we're heading to the top of the hour. We got one last question, I think we're going to throw out there. Okay. What do you do if either of or both the product owner and manager are too technical? They are always telling the team how to build something. What do you do in that case?
Right. This is a common problem because, as I said at the beginning, we often get too stuck on features. We start talking about what we're going to build instead of the problems we're trying to solve or the opportunities we're trying to take advantage of. We start talking about exactly what we're going to build, the feature set. For the product owner, I'm not as concerned because that may be a way to organize the work and get it into the team. Hopefully they understand it. So I'm not going to freak out right away. If it's my product manager who's just stuck in features, here's why I take them out to the woodshed, right? And start saying, usually you could take some training from people like Pragmatic Institute because they'll help you understand that that's not your job at all. Your job is not to stop being a chief designer, right? Your job is to do something else entirely. And this is where startups really, differ between the startups that have really cool technology and people get excited, but nothing happens, versus startups that say, we understand a core problem and we think we have technology that addresses the problem. That's a whole different mindset. And so it's much more dangerous if the product manager is thinking technology thoughts than the product owner. Product owner, I'm trying to still say, if that's happening with a product owner, I will coach my Scrum Master, my team to start saying, that's a great, interesting. Tell me how that's going to make our consumers better. And try to weasel out the why so they can make their decisions more appropriately.
It's a good answer. I think we're going to close there. I think that's an excellent job you did today, sir. I really appreciate your time and energy. I hope everybody really enjoyed the conversations today. Keep an eye out for this being posted on our YouTube channel. You'll see an email shortly about this, and you can feel free to share that with your colleagues to rewatch it or to kind of look at some things differently. One thing I would
get those job aids down on it too.
Absolutely. Yeah. And one thing I would mention as well is if you have additional thoughts on this particular one or questions you might want to send our way, certainly you can send that information to the link that's here on the page at Earl, at Earl Beede at Construx.com or to hello@Construx.com, and we'll handle them offline. Again, Earl, thanks for a terrific day, and thanks everyone for participating.
All right. Goodbye, all. Enjoy your day.